So this is what your labs are going to look like. And if you're wanting to do the pen test project, I highly recommend it, but it's not a requirement. This is optional. So these are the labs you're going to use. So even if you don't decide to do the project, some of the things you're learning and you certify, you may want to come in here and try in the labs. So this is a good way to learn. So once you log in, uh, you're going to reserve lab time for yourself, like lab times, and we've got several pods in here. So when you come into this screen, you're going to see several pods. There's probably not enough for everyone to be on at the same time, but usually not everyone is logged in at the same time anyway. But you come in here, select the time that you want to schedule it for, and you can schedule this in advance too. So say like if you're not going to be able, you have work and you're not going to be able to do this till 8 p.m., then you can come over here and schedule for 8 p.m. And since we're going to start right away, this red line, the closer you get to that line, you can actually start now. Further away from it, you're going to set it for like, if I click here, it's going to set for 6:30. So we want to start right away. So we're going to go ahead and give ourselves an hour and a half. And while you're doing these labs, it'll prompt you that your lab time is going to log out or is going to time out. You want to extend that. So you can go in and extend your lab time while you're doing the labs, which can be helpful. Sometimes time gets away from you and you don't realize it, and you're going to and it goes to timeout, and so you can extend your time. And also with these labs, the lab state is not saved. And so the lab state, so whatever you do here is not going to be saved. If you run a scan and save files, you're not going to be able to go back and access those files. So you'll need to, if you're doing the project, the pen test project, you'll want to use like your web-based email and maybe something like Dropbox or Google Drive, even the cloud-based storage for Office 365, and save your files there. So you create screenshots and different files. You'll want to save it there later on so you can use for your screenshot, because this doesn't save your state. So as soon as this lab times out, it goes back to the way it originally was. So any configuration changes you make are gone. So someone asked, are we doing the labs through VLabs or through uCertify? These are the optional labs. So this is, you're going to do the labs that are listed in the syllabus are the uCertify labs. These are optional labs. So this is part of the pen test project if you decide to do that. So once we get into the lab, then we're going to go ahead and demonstrate tonight how to find vulnerabilities. So we're going to do some vulnerability detection here. Okay. So when you come to your screen, you're going to need to log in. You're going to need your username and password. And if you come over here, if we see this content tab, this has got all of our usernames and passwords that we need for this environment. So to log in, these are like some of the default credentials you would normally see in Kali Linux. So here our username is root and our password is, or just root in reverse. And once this comes up, you may want to change your screen resolution. So if you just go here into settings, let's see, search for display. You go into your displays, you can change that to whatever size you want. This is going to be a higher resolution, a little bit easier to see things, because some of your tools, when you run them, they're going to take up so much space, you're not going to be able to read the whole screen. So the Nessus vulnerability scanner, which we're going to demonstrate here soon, if you don't expand your screen, then you're going to have a hard time seeing everything on your screen. And so we see in our environment, we've up here at the tabs, we see all the different systems we have, and you can restart those if you need to. Sometimes you may need to, and so to do that, we can go through and power on or power off any of these systems. The Windows XP machine, to get the labs to work correctly, we're going to have to go through here and turn off our firewall. When the labs were set up, the ports that were required to be open weren't configured correctly. We're going to turn this off so that way we can find what things there's going to be. Otherwise, the firewall ports are locked and we're not going to be able to hack it. So we'll be using this in our demo. So is there, yeah, for the optional labs, it's kind of, it's at your discretion to do what you want to as far as just testing the different tools. If you want to do the pen test project, I'm going to send those instructions out as well. And that will show you what you need to do to perform the pen test for the class project. So the labs are just going there as you're working through uCertify and you learn how to use Nmap or Metasploit, then you can come back in this environment and use those tools. So the lab is kind of up to you to do what you want to in. If you do the project, the pen test project, then you're going through and finding all the vulnerabilities, seeing what you can exploit and make the report. And right now I wouldn't start that right away. I would just go and use these labs to learn how to use the tools and all that. Once you get that down, then we'll go through and you'll be set. You'll have enough knowledge and skills to start performing the pen test. And so we go back to our, this is in, if we look at the topology map here, let's see, zoom in a little bit. So these are our different systems. So this is a little network map. And this is our firewall. So if you can hack this firewall or get past it, then that's super awesome. But this is just some extra machines. So when you're doing the class pen test, all the machines except for the Kali 1 and 2 are in scope for your pen test. So these three systems here and this system are in scope for your pen test. These two are just for you. These are your testing systems. So these are the ones you have to perform your pen test with. So these are not in scope. And so when we do our scans, we really don't we're really not too concerned with leaving these out of scope. We could scan those if we want to. I'm going to show you different ways to do Nmap and Nessus scans to only select the certain things that are in scope. Because this Metasploitable system right here, we don't have the IP address for, so it's up to us to kind of discover that. So this one tool I will demonstrate here is Net Discover. And what this does it will discover on our VLAN, our virtual LAN, or the network segment that we're on, it uses the ARP protocol to detect systems. So we're out here seeing these different VMs are coming up. So we see this one right here, the .1 should be our firewall, because usually your .1 is normally, you don't have to set it that, but usually your default gateway for your outbound port out of your router, out of your network is usually .1. So this one is this is going to be our firewall. So we go look at our topology map, and okay, so this is the pfSense firewall. So we look here, it's .1, so that is correct. So we're going to be scanning these other systems, but this Net Discover, if you're on a network and you don't know what the network is like or what systems are on your same subnet, you can run this Net Discover command and it'll pull up the different systems. So we see these are all VMware virtual machines, and these MAC addresses, their machine address is tied to all the different network adapters and systems. And so since this is running in a VMware environment in the back end, what we're seeing here is the MAC addresses from VMware. So if you're running on a regular environment where not all the systems are virtualized, then you may see like an a MAC address of a MacBook Pro in your network. So the MAC address is going to be different. Intel network adapters have a different MAC address. So some of those items are going to, they'll give you a little detail on what you're seeing there. But this is a handy little tool. It's not, I mean, it's normally on a pen test, you may not use this tool, but it's just kind of a tool to find, what's on, using ARP to find some hosts on your local network. And so what we're going to do next here is when you're performing a pen test, you want to see what all's in your environment, look for open ports and services. And what I mean by ports, we're looking for the open TCP/IP ports. Uh, so these could be using the UDP protocol, which is connectionless, like DNS uses UDP. So it will let you connect to things, but not usually not a steady connection. And then TCP is for your connection protocol. So if you're FTPing to something you're connecting, then you need that constant connection. And so here we've got we're going to run Nmap, which stands for Network Mapper. And so you run this, and this is going to give you the help page or the man page, which if you use the man command, which is help, the different help manuals, that will give you the details. So we're seeing here some different syntax for the scanning techniques and stuff. And you'll be going through this in your studies of the certified content, as well as using some of these labs, some of the labs that are in Certify that you'll actually do in Nmap. So the first scan, we're doing -PN. This is no probe, which it makes your scans go a little quicker. We're going to do a version scan, plus we're going to do the default scripts. And there's a set of scripts called the NSE, the Nmap uh, scripting engine scripts, and these will perform other types of activities. They're almost like little utilities or tools on their own. So this will set, when you run this, you'll get more information on the target. And I'll tell you what we're going to do here. I'm just going to kind of show you the differences that you see using the different versions of these scans, using the different options. So we're just going to scan a single target to start with. And this is basically, we're not doing a probe, so we're just running the default. And so this kind of gives you a more minimal view of the open ports. And this can be helpful sometimes if you're just wanting to get a quick view of what's open. This runs quickly on your network. Once you start adding the SV function that looks for the versions, so that's going to do a little more work. It's going to require more time to get that information, enumerate that information off that system. And so as we add more options, so we're going to add, you'll see that we're getting more details. So this is the version information. So you'll see the difference of what we get with this scan. And sometimes ports that are showing up as unknown will show up as known ports. You'll find out some of the information. And so from this preliminary scan, the first scan, we're seeing this looks like it's a Microsoft operating system because we're seeing port 445, the Microsoft Directory Services, or Active Directory as it's called. And so you can see it's taking a little bit longer here because we're checking the services. This is going to give us more detailed information on our target IP address. I'm going to flip back over here to our topology map and see which one we're scanning. Okay, so this is Windows 7 is the operating system. So we did see that we were able to correctly figure, and there's some other ports here that are used in Microsoft networking. We see port 135, port 139, that's used for Microsoft networking. And when we were in that net discover a while ago, remember we saw the MAC address? So we're seeing the MAC address of this particular system. So as you're doing your pen testing, you're enumerating and you're doing your reconnaissance and you're enumerating more information on the system. The more information you get, the better you're going to be able to find the vulnerabilities and exploit and hack into that system. And last week when we were talking about the different pen test types, and these are based on the information you have, the black box test, blind pen test, more of the attacker view, we're going to have less information. So that's going to require more research, more reconnaissance and enumeration on our part to get that information that we need to find the vulnerabilities and possibly hack into it. The white box, the crystal box is going to be login information like a username and password. So if you have the username and password and you're running a vulnerability scan, you're going to be able to get more information because you're testing as an authenticated user. Then your gray box test is going to be a combination of the two. You've got IP addresses, but you don't have user accounts. So you've got the information of the targets you need to test. So you're not having to go out and find those targets. So like here, if we didn't have the topology map we got on our network, and they just gave us that, just told us to test whatever's on this subnet, it would be up for us to detect it. If it was a gray box pen test, they're going to give us the subnet range to scan or individual IP addresses. But as we work through this, so we can see the difference in these scans here. We have more information. See on port 445 here, we're seeing that it's actually in a Microsoft work group. So this is not actually in directory services, it's just in a work group. If this was an Active Directory, then you would have a different name here in place of the work group. In most of your enterprise environments, they're going to be running Active Directory. So we see up here that it just says Microsoft Directory Services. That's it. And so this one gives us the version of Windows. So this is showing like Windows 7 to 10. So this is showing that this is more likely Windows 7 or Windows 10. So we're getting a little more information. So some of these other Microsoft ports that we saw earlier, 135 and 139, we had no information on those, just very minimal. Microsoft RPC, the NetBIOS. So we come down here, it's giving us a little more information. So we're getting the version information over here. So this is when we run the -SV, we're getting version information. So version information is important when you're looking for vulnerabilities and looking for vulnerabilities that you can actually hack into. I mean, that's why they call it ethical hacking or penetration testing. You're looking for flaws to penetrate that system. And so we can see that this is running up here. We saw that we're running HTTP. We don't know what that is. With the first scan, that could be Apache web server, but we're running Microsoft IIS in version 7.5. So we're able to look up those vulnerabilities, those particular ports there, and look for different vulnerabilities. So we'll go ahead and there's a tool that you'll use called Searchploit. And we're going to go ahead and demo that now based on IIS 7.5. And you can do these scans without the version information. This is what it's going to get you here. So we do IIS, we get a bunch back, a lot of responses back. We get all different version information. And in some cases, this is, you want to get the information specific to that version that you're looking at during your test. So we have some multiple vulnerabilities, and this is multiple versions. So this is vulnerabilities that are version 6 up to 7.5. And this is using like PHP as one of the types of language you're using instead of just straight HTML. We're using PHP. And so here, this next vulnerability, this is on Windows 7, and this is 7.5. So this is the version that we're running against. So this exploit can be ran against that. And this is a remote denial of service test. So during your pen test, you really don't want to run this because what it's going to do is it's going to possibly reboot that system or shut it down altogether. In our pen test, one of the things we got to remember, as a pen tester, we want our customer or our employer's environment to stay stable and up and running. You start taking stuff offline, rebooting systems or shutting them down altogether, then people start getting upset because a lot of times these systems mean if it's not e-commerce, it could be some accounting site. If we're doing anything to disrupt production, then that can mean losing money. And business may not understand the security side of things, but they understand when something breaks that it's going to cost money. That's another reason too to let them know when you're doing your pen tests that if they're breached, this could cost the company money. So that's the language that the business folks speak. So we don't want to take those down. So this is one of the ways we can look up those vulnerabilities. And we will go ahead and look at exploit DB, because what this search exploit is it's a local version of exploit DB running on your system. So this script is nice because you may be in an environment where you're not able to connect to the internet. And a lot of times companies do this for security reasons. You may not be able to get to certain websites. If you're doing a pen test somewhere, they may not give you access to the internet. So sometimes you'll need to download things in advance, and so using search exploit, it contains the same information as you would see on here. Although this in our lab is a little bit outdated, so you won't have some of the vulnerabilities, some of the exploits on our local repository that we would have online. So here, that sometimes if you like a web interface, sometimes this is a good. So we'll IIS 7.5, and we'll do a search here. So we found the same two vulnerabilities, and this is a script that searches those. Like I said, all these are done here locally, and if we want to execute any of those, so like if I want to take a look at that first vulnerability there, I can cap file, and so if we want to look for the directory where this is contained, this is going to be the root directory of all this. So we can cap. And so this is the root where all these are contained. So we need to look for exploits. So we'll type in ex. And one of the things about Linux, you can tab complete. So I can start typing something in. So I type in WN, and it completes Windows. So I put this / I'm going to type in, so that there's remote. So we're going to type in, since there's multiple starting with 1.9, we're going to have to type in more of it, but at least that cuts down on some of the typing you need to do when you're trying to navigate or view files. So we did the cat of the file, and it's kind of showing us about the vulnerability. And this one here is a text file. So some of the text files, it could be just different techniques that you need to do to hack into a system. It could be code that needs to be compiled. It could be multiple pieces of code that are separate files. But anyway, this goes through here and shows us what software is affected. And we said details by sending a special request to the IIS 6.0 server running PHP. The attacker can successfully bypass restriction. And so this is, if we go back and look, it shows 6.0 to 7.5. So it may not be vulnerable. So it's maybe one of those things that if it's 7.5, it may work. But you really want to look for your exploits that are specific to that version. And it could range across several versions. But as I mentioned, we looked at the content of this exploit. If we want to look at the content of this other exploit, you can see it. And sometimes it's easier to view these exploits through a web interface. So it's color coded, it's easier to see. And so we see here, this is a Python script, and this is the way the code looks like. So we see what our code looks like there. We see the name of the person that created this exploit. There's a different Python code. And as far as being a pen tester goes, if you know Python, if you know scripting or programming, you can write your own tools, and at least you want to get to the level, if you're pursuing a pen test career, you want to be able to at least modify the scripts and the code. As we come back here, look at our source code. This is what's referred to as our shell script. So this is going to execute the code, and this is going to create a shell. And so sometimes you may need to change this. So understanding how to modify these scripts make a big difference. I don't write my own tools, but I can go through and I can modify these scripts. So that's kind of a good area to be. And see, we can actually individually download these vulnerabilities too, if we need to download it wasn't on our system. And just by keeping Kali Linux or Parrot OS, whatever version of Linux you're using, if you run an update on your system, then it'll update those tools and it keeps that up to date. So we're back to looking at our nmap scans. So we see the difference here of just doing a plain scan with the non-probe command with running the service. Now, if we go through and we run the default scripts, these NSE scripts, we're going to get a little more information here. The only thing difference we added is the SC, and this gives you a little more information. So my default scan when I run something, I'll use the SV and SC commands. And sometimes, like I said, you may just want to quickly go through and see what open ports you have, like we did up here. And as you go along, you can take note of these. So there's different note-taking tools. Probably in this particular version of Kali Linux, there's probably Cherry Tree running here. And so as you keep notes as you're going along, that way you don't have to go back and redo things. You'll also output your scans to files. Tools. It's not appearing that it is, but carry tree, keep note, Joplin is a good one. It's not installed in here, but you can install on your own system. But what you do is you can keep record of what you're testing. So it's kind of like when you think of keep note, carry tree, and Joplin, it's kind of like OneNote from Microsoft, or from OneNote. And then Evernote, if you're familiar with that tool, it's a note-taking tool. And what you would do is you would go through and create a note or a note for each IP address you test. Then we can copy and paste our nmap output into that folder and just kind of keep track of it. So each item we can go down a little further and put in more information on what we're scanning. And so we see here on our scan using the script version, now we're seeing the difference between these two scans. See the second scan we ran with the version option. If we scroll down here, we've got even more information on these. And see, we're getting in here. This is using the SMB protocol. We're seeing more version information. So we're seeing this is Windows 7 Professional. And so we see more information. So we account used. So the guest account is running. Authenticated is user level. So this is more information that you can collect here. So that kind of shows you the difference there when you run those scans. And so if we're scanning in a pen test, so here we'll just go ahead and do something like what would be done when you're doing your, in the lab, how I would do a scan here. So we're going to run this default script. And there's another script that I like to run. Script. It's called vuln. And this looks for vulnerability. So this will give you a little more information. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go back to this page because I'm going to run a scan of all the different systems on this network. So we'll go ahead and run this. And this we'll get a little more information from this too. And as we mentioned the other day, some of the denial of service vulnerabilities, and this vuln checks for the slow loris denial of service vulnerability by default, and it'll let you know that it's not vulnerable to it. And this is kind of a little outdated version of Nmap. There's newer versions out, which they're out of all the open source free pen testing tools out there. See, we should have this first one of the first things we'll have is this not vulnerable to slow loris. But this is like one of the tools out there, one of the older tools that's been maintained, so it's constantly updated each year. Like during the summer, they do something similar to Google, where they bring in people to try to come up with different uh, functionality to add to it, as well as just in working on improvements. So they're constantly improving it. And actually, some of the functionality for sniffing that we use for PCAPs, they're actually one of the drivers is being used from Nmap now and some of the other systems, like in Wireshark, because it was a more robust, better set of drivers for running Wireshark. So this is going to take a little longer. As you see, we add more and more to it. We're going to take a little longer. And we can also add like syntax on there to uh, syntax to print out to a file, to look for just open ports. And sometimes that can be helpful just to look for open ports. So you're trying, we're going through, sometimes you'll see closed ports or filtered ports, and we see all those are open. So if we run, sometimes if you get like a large number of filtered ports, you don't really want to see all that when you're trying to figure out what to target. So we can see this taking longer. So we can also hit like our V for verbose, and it increases the verbosity. And so this tells us how much time is remaining and what percentage we're done. And you can see like the status where it's running through. So the NSE scripts it's running through, it's showing how far along that is. And if you ever want to get an update to see where you are, where your status is in your scan, if you just hit enter, it'll give you an updated status on that. And so if we hadn't scanned this before, we're seeing that we have one up and it's undergoing the script portion of the scan. And so here in just a little bit, we're going to go through and I'm going to show you how to use Nessus, because Nessus is a vulnerability scanner. And it's good to know how to manually detect vulnerabilities, kind of like we're doing here, and to be able to do it automated. If you're doing a large pen test, you can have thousands of IP addresses, and that can take a long time to get through that scan, trying to go manually. So what this does is this finds the easy targets, the low-hanging fruit quickly, because and it gives you more time to work on the more complex vulnerabilities. So you got time to spend, doing more manual testing on where it's needed. Okay, so our scan completed. And so we can look at the time. Just real quick while I'm thinking about this, is this 227.48 seconds to complete, compared to 69.89 seconds. You can see how much it's really increasing. So we go way back up to our original scan. Okay, there we go. 5.969 seconds. So you see the difference in time it takes. So that's one of the reasons you may run just a particular scan with, looking for the certain items just to find open ports to make sure, because you may find that, okay, this target's got a lot of ports to go after. And so you can kind of go back and do preliminary scans. And okay, so for looking for vulnerabilities, we see that this one is vulnerable to Microsoft 17-010, which is part of those eternal blue set of vulnerabilities based on some of those exploits that the NSA released several years ago. And these are usually risk factor. This is high. And so these are going to be something that we can exploit, and we'll we'll show you how to do that here just a little bit. And this is a really good one to hack into. So we went through and we ran uh, the different default scripts. We ran the vulnerability scripts, and when you run the vulnerabilities, it will give you more. It'll give you like some of the vulnerability database numbers for those, and so we can look up some of these CVEs on this information and get more information. So here we have like different links. So this is pretty much running like a little command line vulnerability scanner. So what we're going to do here, we're going to run a similar type scan, but this time we're going to output to a file. And I'm going to go ahead and show you the open command. So this only shows open. So we want to speed up our scan. So we'll use T4. If you get faster than T4, then it scans too fast and you can possibly miss some things. So we don't want to do that. So this time we're going to do more than one IP address. And you can do multiple. The way we're going to do multiple, but you can use like multiple IP addresses in that syntax. So if we wanted to go here, we could do 1 through 10. But in this case, we're going to do 0. We'll do the full 24-bit subnet. And we're going to end up picking up our 2 Kali machines too, but we note the IP addresses and exclude that from your information. So we're going to do output conversion all. So we're going to go ahead and use OK. And this is going to give you the format we're seeing over here is the regular Nmap formatting, the way it outputs. So using this all format, it's going to give us the Nmap format. It's going to give us a greppable format, which you can use the grep command to look through those files, and it makes it easier to find stuff with the greppable command. And it also gives you an XML version of the output. And the XML version of the output is helpful in different tools, like different report writing tools, like Dratus. Dratus is a pen test report writing tool. And so these different tools, you can import the XML output. So it makes it handy when you're using these different tools. So we're going to give our name to our file. So we'll just go ahead and name it pentest 1. And so what this is going to do, this is going to output everything to a file. Since we're doing a scan that's going to take a little bit longer, since there's multiple IPs in here, I went ahead and use this -T4. That way it can speed our testing up a little bit. And you have to spell it right too. Spell Nmap wrong. So if you don't spell it right, it's not going to work. And so the use certify content is going to take you through using Nmap. There's some labs in there. And one of the nice things about the use certify content is step-by-step information on how to do that. So yeah, so step-by-step information on how to use Nmap, Metasploit. And so, if it's left up to you to guess, so it's good to have the step-by-step stuff the first time you try it, and then you try it on your own without those steps. And that way you learn how to do it, because everyone, when you start out, looking at the syntax for Nmap scan is pretty simple, but when you start out, you may not think of everything, from memory. And it's a good idea to keep notes. And as I mentioned, different note-taking tools, it's a good idea to have Keep Note, Evernote, or one of those tools to keep notes of how you do different types of, Nmap scans and use different tools. You see this is running. So we see so far that we've discovered 5 hosts. And so 4 left of the scan going on there. But yeah, so you just take notes of that, so that way you got notes of how to use the different tools, and then when you're doing your pen test, you would keep like a different set of notes for that. So you want to track, the different IP addresses, what open ports you're finding. So once you do that, then you kind of go through and you find the different types of vulnerabilities, then you use different ports, different options on your port scanner like Nmap, use some different NSE scripts. And there's some different tools out there you use as well that we can test those vulnerabilities. And a lot of that's based on what ports we're seeing open. Since we saw port 80 open, then we could use a tool like Nikto, which is a web application vulnerability scanner that's command line based, that we can get more information on that target by running that. Since we're letting that scan run, I can show you what, yeah, someone mentioned, yeah, Phil mentioned, yeah, that is a great tool. I hadn't really used Greenshot much until I was doing a pen test, a side freelance pen test the past few months, and they have screenshots set up on their pen testing boxes. But yeah, your screenshots are very important, and you want to take, when you're exploiting something, you want step by step screenshots of how you got in. That way you can prove that it was vulnerable and you exploited it. And so we're going to go ahead here and I'll go ahead and run Nikto against this. This is a different type of scanner. So we're just going to run this against port 80 and we can see, well, it's not. So by default, that should scan just like port 80. There's some other hosts on there that may have HTTP functionality on those ports, but we can run through here and see what we can find. Ah, you know what I did wrong? This is what I did wrong. Well, the HTTP should have worked because it is running port 80. It is open. But there you normally put in your URL that you're scanning. So sometimes you can find, I've found vulnerabilities with Nikto that some of the commercial vulnerability scanners didn't find. We'll go back and look on our status here. So we're still running. So this is going to take a while. Okay.
I think it's 192 instead 92.
Yeah, I did something before that too. Yeah, it should be 192. I think you have to keep an eye on me because I tend to miss things. But for some reason, I could have sworn I put 192 in one of the first times, and I guess I did it wrong from the start. No, I did it. I used it and it didn't work. I don't know what went on. That should work. Because, for instance, if we did here, if we went in, So yeah, that should work. I just don't know why. It's something with the way that HTTP is configured on that system. Okay. Yeah. So we see this is another way to validate the version of IIS that we're running. So this is port 80. We did that by default. So if it was a different port, then for HTTPS, if it was running 443, then we would change that to HTTPS. We'll go over here and change the different ports. So maybe it was 8443. We would change that there. Get that. So we can see that this shows the different HTTP methods that are enabled, and some of the HTTP methods can be risky. So here we've got post, which post allows you to, so post is not bad. Puts and deletes are bad. So if you have like a put HTTP method, then you can upload files from the command line to that system. If you got deletes, you can actually delete files on there too. So we see here, there's possibly some cross-site scripting. I think I saw that they had like the default page listed. And so if you got the default page, that just means that you go in there and you can, you see that the content, sometimes it may, it reveals information on the version, and you really don't want your websites to have version information to be visible. So so it shows here installs will be default IIS install. So it just finds different things like this. Things we found are not really critical. You can find stuff like usernames and passwords, default credentials using that scan. Okay, so we completed scans of all of our targets. And so here you can see we're finding some web-based stuff on there too on one of these sites. And so to show you the difference between our files, we do the ls command. And so we see the output from our files. So we have, this is the greppable output. This is the regular nmap output that we've been used to seeing here, and then the XML. So we can look at, let's see how this is kind of more compact and in a single line. How you kind of see that it's using different ways to separate stuff out. So that's the greppable format. And so for the XML format, let's use XML. So if you have the right XML plugins to your browser, you can open up an XML file of an Nmap scan. It'll have color coded different things that's found during the scans and all this. So this is really good for pulling into different tools. That's one of the main reasons I do it. So if you want to just use like individual file types, so if we wanted to just do the nmap file type, then we would just do n. If we want to do just greppable, then we would do just g. We did the -a to get all the formats. So we will go over here now. We've kind of seen how, a while ago when we ran the scan, we saw that there was some IIS vulnerabilities, and those aren't really that bad, but we can go back to our vulnerabilities up here. We had so we go up here, we look for 017. And so we're going to look at, and so this brings up the different vulnerabilities that we could, the different exploits for the vulnerabilities that we could use. Like here, denial of service, we don't want to use that, but you can see some of these other ones here. And we'll go ahead and run a vulnerability scan with Nessus, and then we'll go back and exploit one of these systems. So we need to minimize our terminal window there and bring up Nessus. So you just kind of start typing in Nessus, it'll bring up Nessus and you go to log in. And so a while ago, remember we came over here to content and our login is admin. There's also OpenVOS on here. It's kind of it's an open source vulnerability scanner that was forked out of the original Nessus. And so it's open source. So it's another tool you can use. So they're not, even though it was forked out of it, there's differences. So they've made updates and changes to it since it was forked out of Nessus. And I've seen companies that will run Nessus and they'll go back and run OpenVOS too to see if they find any vulnerabilities that might have got missed by that particular vulnerability scanner. So we know admin are our login credentials. And so we're going to create a new scan. And for this, we're just going to use a basic network scan. We have all sorts of other scans that you can run here. This Spectre and Meltdown, WannaCry, Tenable, the company that makes Nessus, they come out with these standalone type of scans. So if there is some particular vulnerability that's out, like when WannaCry ransomware was out, then you could scan all the systems on your network to make sure that they don't have WannaCry ransomware on there. So there's like mobile device scans. And this version of Nessus we're using, I believe it's Nessus Essentials. It used to be like Nessus Home. This is a little bit older version, but pretty similar to what you can download at home. It scans up to 18 IP addresses, so you can scan like 16 different IP addresses. So your home lab, that's plenty, and so you can get experience using Nessus. So you just need to name your scan here. You can name that based on the environment you're testing. So if you're testing a PCI environment or whatever, you could use PCI and whatever zone you're scanning, put that in there. You can put a description of what you're scanning. And so we can do like a full 24-bit mask like we did before, just like doing this, or you could do single IPs at a time. You can take like a list of IPs and put in there. So we're just going to go ahead and add all the subnets. So schedule, we go in here, we could set the schedule to scan a certain time. Sometimes you have to scan after hours to prevent taking any systems down. So you can set that to start. So you don't have to get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to start your scans. It starts it automatically for you. But since we want to run on demand, we're not going to do that. And so discovery. So we're just going to do the common ports. You could do, when you're doing your pen test project, you may want to do all ports because sometimes the common ports may miss something. But we're just going to do all common ports. If you do all ports, we're going to scan all 65,535 ports, but we're just going to do the common ports. And then if we go to advanced, this does like, okay, that's not what I'm looking for, the assessment type. If we go here, this just does the default. So this will test for certain, so disable web application vulnerability scanning. So it's not testing anything. So if we add scan for known vulnerabilities, that might find a little extra web related stuff. And on pen tests, I've found things, doing pen tests where I just added in these web vulnerabilities. It's a way to do a little extra scanning and find possible web vulnerabilities. So I could save this and execute it later, launch it later. But I'm gonna go ahead and click launch now. So we go ahead and launch it. It's a lot of stuff we're doing manually. If you've got a big network and it could take a while, the thing about Nessus, you really want to use both methods because and sometimes you can start out with Nessus or you can do Nmap first. But if you start out with Nessus, you can go through and see what you find. You may find some interesting targets that you want to run some Nmap scans against to see if you can find more information out that maybe you're not getting from your Nessus scans. So we click on that, we see that we've already discovered 5 hosts. And if you look over here at this legend, this tells you the vulnerabilities. We haven't found anything yet, but we're going to. And it shows critical, high, medium, low, and informational. And when you're doing a pen test, if you find criticals or highs, that's something you want to report right away. Because if you're doing an external pen test from the internet and you find a vulnerable vulnerability that's like critical or high, a lot of cases those can be exploited. So you want to make sure that your client or your customer, your employer knows about that, so they could go through and patch that, do some kind of remediation to prevent, a malicious actor from exploiting. So we see the different systems. So we see our two Windows systems, .15.75, are getting a lot of have a lot of vulnerabilities come up here. One of them is like Windows XP. It's a little more outdated, and some people will think XP, that's old. I'm not going to see that in the real world, but you still see Windows XP in the real world. I did a pen test for a Fortune 100, or maybe lower or higher in the ratings than that had XP running in their environment, in the Fortune 100 or better, and they had these vulnerabilities. They had Windows XP in their environment, which I was able to get into pretty quickly. And so we're seeing these different vulnerabilities come up. And so let's see here. Get back to so one of these will have the same vulnerability that we looked up, the MS 07710. That'll come up here shortly. But you can go through here and these will show you that if you go over here along with your risk information, it shows you the base score is 10. There's usually different links to get more information on it. So we can see some different Microsoft bulletins on there, as well as some different CVEs that you can look up to get more information on that. And it shows that it's exploitable. So you look up here in vulnerability information, exploit available, true. So there is an exploit. And let's see, and it says exploits are available. Sometimes it can tell you that it's easy to exploit or the exploits are available. Shows the vulnerability publish date on there. And so we see that it's exploitable with Metasploit and also Core Impact. Metasploit has a commercial tool that is not free. It has a nice web front end to make things easier. If you're running their Nexpose vulnerability scanner, you can find vulnerabilities and it lets you kind of click on that and open up Metasploit Professional. So it makes things a little more streamlined and easier to do. But the Metasploit framework, you can do a lot of the same stuff. And so let's see, someone's got their, okay, someone unmuted there for a second. So so yeah, you can use the framework is good. It's interesting because while I was a consultant, I never had access to Metasploit Professional. But then when I went to work for a company that did, I was so used to the command line, I didn't even use the professional version. But Core Impact is another tool that is an exploitation tool for vulnerabilities. So we're starting to see some other vulnerabilities coming up here. So email using clear text logins. So that's a vulnerability here, not quite as high because you can see this is a low. And so we see some different web vulnerabilities. So since we did that, we added those web checks in there. It's starting to find some different web application vulnerabilities. And sometimes in your pen test, you may not be able to get in, exploit a system through some of the network vulnerabilities, because sometimes companies stay on top of their patches, but sometimes not so much with their web-based applications. And so here's the one vulnerability that we saw earlier that we looked up on ExploitDB, that Nmap showed that this particular host was vulnerable to MS17-10. So this gives us some different information on it, and ease of exploit information, also what can be used. And so they're showing the MS17 Eternal Blue SMB remote. So this is a vulnerability that we could use with Metasploit. And so while you're doing your class, if you're doing the class project of the pen test, then you can save your scans. But what you'll need to do is you'll just need to export it to like a PDF. That way you've got information on that. So on your pen test report, you just will use this to get information to look for certain exploits. So you don't have to keep running this. You'll want to save this as a save the file, save the report. So we'll be able to do that once it's completed. But you can email that to yourself or use Dropbox or some other cloud-based disk storage to put that on there. We're starting to get more vulnerabilities. Even our firewall here is got some vulnerabilities. SSL self-signed certificates are the vulnerability there. So those are usually kind of hard to exploit. And then something with the time server. So while we're letting that run, we'll go ahead and show you how we exploit one of these vulnerabilities. We'll go after .15 since it's a newer operating system. And we're going to need to initialize the database if you want to use the database. And the database is helpful because you can store your project information. There's a option called let's see, okay, so this is starting our database up, connecting our database to see how it's creating the user and connecting. So once we get in there, we can save stuff to the database, and it makes it easier to manage your projects too when you've got the stuff in the database, because you're managing multiple pen tests, you're testing different VLANs or subnets within an environment, then you can go back and keep that separate. So it's easier to manage your project. So we're gonna start the Metasploit Framework. Okay, so we type in workspace. It's going to show you our default workspace. So we're going to, so we want to add. So we're going to go through here, workspace, -A for add. We're just going to name it pen test. Now if we type in workspace again, we see that we've changed to the pen test workspace. And so that's can be seen by it's highlighted in red and has the asterisk next to it. And you can actually run in-map scans, or you can import in-map scans in here from your in-map scans we ran. So let's see. Okay, the import. Let's see. And so we're importing this information in there. So we've got this in here now. So let's say type in the host command. We're going to see the devices that we scan. We type in loot, and so there's like no vulnerabilities in there. So okay, and so we're going to go after 15. So what we're going to do is search. We're able to search on our, okay, so we're going to use the external blue exploit here. We're just going to type this in, and this is where your tab completes come in handy. You can even copy and paste, but okay, so with the show options, we're going to show you what other information you need in there. So we're going to need to know what the target is to know what we're going to exploit. So right here, so far, we just got things like our hosts. So we're going to need to set our host set. So we got a remote host set, and that's what that stands for, remote host. So this is our target. And we're going to need a payload. This is the way we're going to connect to that. And so if you want to see what payloads are available, show payloads. And so we can see all these different options that are available here. But usually if you've got an option for Meterpreter, then use a Meterpreter payload because it's going to give you more options. You're able to dump like password hashes and do a lot of the things. Some of these other may just give you a shell to that system. So this really makes your work a lot easier when we get in here. So, and you need to take in consideration, you know, it's a 64-bit window. So when you're selecting that, so we're going to set payload. Filter, there's TCP shell. Now, since we've added a payload, it's going to need a local host. Local host is our system. So, you know, just think of, you know, local host or the L host is like your local host, like you local host IP address, whatever. So it's, this is you, this is your attacking system. So we need to set L host. And if you do like double tab, it will complete that for you. Sometimes if you're running a VPN across a VPN, then you have to go in and manually set this. And so there is an option, check out, there is an option on some systems to, or some of these exploits to type in check, and it will test to see if that system's vulnerable. And it's a good way to make sure that, because sometimes you run these exploits and it could kind of mess up the TCP port you're trying to connect on. And now that system's got to be rebooted for it to work. So this way we're able to test it ahead of time in some cases. This case, we're not going to be able to. So we're going to go ahead and exploit. And this is where tools like Metasploit makes our life easier. You know, if you have to, some other exploits or scripts that you have to run to be able to hack that system. And now you see here, we have a Meterpreter prompt. So we have a Meterpreter session to our host. And as you can see, as we're connecting, it started the reverse TCP handler and it's connecting to target for exploitation. So you see how it's communicating, it's executing. And so we're actually seeing like the service pack information, the Windows server information as this is exploiting. So we successfully exploited the system. So we get the user ID, we can see who we're logged in as. And so we're logged in as NT System Authority. This is like on a Windows system, this is like you got anything administrator has and more. So there's things you can run on here without restriction. And so if we got access to like just a lower level user, just a regular user, then we'd have to elevate our privileges. And so we would do some cases you get system. If we were like just a regular user, then this would elevate your privileges. And so we didn't have to do that because we were already at the highest level access. And so we can do like hash dump. And so we dump some password hashes here. So we see our administrator account, and your administrator account uses this 500 ID here. And so the admin account, this may have admin level access, but has been created on this system. A lot of people will create a separate admin account. And so this one, typically you can tell accounts created by users because they may not set the first character uppercase. And usually admin is not a default Microsoft user account. And so you could take these hashes, dump the hash, and then you can use something like Hashcat to crack the hashes. You can do like pass the hash attacks and that sort of thing. And so if we want to get on that system as we would see if you're on the system from the command line, look around now. We just typed in the shell command, and now we have a shell on that system. So we can do a directory. We see all the files on there. So we can do CD backslash, and we're to the root directory. And so we see, and this is, so there's the book app. So this is the app that was in the book that was installed for this lab. Okay, so you can see the stuff for that. But this is based off of Georgia Weidman's book, Penetration Testing: A Hands-On Guide to Hacking. So this was the original book we used for this class, but we switched to Pentest Plus so students could get a certification if they wanted. The Pentest Plus came out the year that we started this class. And so the following year we added the CompTIA Pentest Plus content. So we want to change directories. We can go into users. And so since we're admin, we can go into anyone's directory. So we can go into admin, which that is, so there we can go into whatever directory we want to. If we were a lower level user, we may not be able to get into anyone's directories but our own. So as a pen tester, you could go through and we could have looked at uh, the documents directory. Maybe there's some passwords for other systems that the administrator is administering, which is not good practice, but it does happen sometimes. We're going there, see if there's any files in there. So we see there's some stuff related to Visual Studio in there and Microsoft SQL. Okay, so we'll go back and look at the, so you got to see how to exploit a system. So you'll get to do that. And the use certify content shows how to use Metasploit. So you will be able to get some practice on that before you get into the labs. And so export, so we can export just the Nessus file, or you can export a PDF. You can do either one. I would say if you want to go back and import that back in, you could take the Nessus file and save it on Dropbox or something, come back and reload it later on if you need to, or you can just simply create a PDF. And so we want to use custom because we don't just want the executive summary. And so group by host, so that we group by host, and that shows all the vulnerabilities for that particular host, the way we were going through looking at per IP address, or you can do by plugin. So this will look at for different vulnerabilities associated with that. I would sort by host, and then you just export the PDF, and then you can upload it to Dropbox or Google Drive or some other, or even if you have Office 365, you could put on OneDrive just to kind of show you what it looks like. So it creates almost like a little, it creates your report from this. And so you can go through and look at the different vulnerabilities. And this information is good to put in your pen test report. So you'll put these different things in there. So you find this particular, let's go back and look at some of the more critical vulnerabilities. So you can come in here, pull your information off about that vulnerability and put it in your report. just like the information you saw in Nessus. So we see the description. So you put your description in there, this for the remediation, and I'll send out a report template for that. So